Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading Chapter 9 of F.I.S.T. by Joe Eszterhas, but first a quick recap. The previous chapter began with Mike Monahan, the driver from a few chapters back, happening upon Johnny and offering him a ride home. Something about Johnny intrigued Mike, and he knew that Johnny would be a perfect fit in the Federation of Interstate Truckers, the union Mike had been a part of since its inception. It takes some convincing, but with the offer of an office and a car, along with Abe agreeing to go with him, Johnny agrees to become a union organizer for F.I.S.T. After getting his barely working car, Johnny sees Anna, the girl he started a street brawl over, walking down the street. He strikes out for now and comes back to reality. Over time, Johnny broadens his knowledge on labor news and the happenings of the working class of America. His growing knowledge gives him inspiration, but also bitterness. Johnny sees unions all over America fighting for their workers while his own union sits on its hands. He learns very quickly that the problem lies in the leadership of F.I.S.T., Matt Rafferty, a cufflink-wearing drunk who is seen as a joke by the men of the union. And now, F.I.S.T., Chapter 9. One night Monahan let him get behind the wheel of his big truck. Monahan watched him as he battled with the gears and careened around the curves of a woodsy two-lane blacktop. "So what do you think, Johnny?" Monahan said. Johnny laughed. "It feels like if I reach out, I can touch the goddamn trees." "Yeah, and if you push her any more, we'll be touching the goddamn cement." They laughed. A truck barreled toward them, and as it roared by, the driver waved. Johnny grinned, waved back, and shifted gears. The big truck bucked, lurched, then speeded up. "They're gonna make me pay for a whole new rig when you're done," Monahan laughed. "Honest to God, Mike, it feels like it's alive. The goddamn power." "I know what you mean, Johnny. Slow her down, though. Myrtle's is right around the bend." Johnny eased the big truck in front of a small white clapboard shack a few hundred feet from the road. A glaring red neon sign announced Myrtle's Eats. Two other trucks were parked in front. Monahan bustled into the place. Johnny tagged behind him. "Mertz!" Monahan boomed, his arms outspread. "How I've missed you, Mertz." She was a tired blonde in her mid-40s, shapeless and sweating. "Don't you dolly me, Monahan," she said. "It's still going to cost you 5 cents. Monahan laughed and leered at her kiddingly. "I'd pay $100 for it, Mertz. You know that." "You wouldn't pay $100 for Mae West," she said. They sat down at the corner and Myrtle automatically handed them steaming cups of black coffee. "Here," Monahan said, resting his hand on hers. "I want you to meet Johnny Kovac. He's our new organizer." Myrtle smiled at him. "You must be hard up, kid," she said. "How about some raisin pie?" He shook his head. "I'm not that hungry." Monahan elbowed him lightly in the ribs. "Make your pecker stand up," he whispered. "Okay," Johnny laughed. "That case, I'll have a piece." Myrtle brought them 2 pieces of pie. "I didn't ask for one, did I?" Monahan said. "I figure you need it worse than him," Myrtle said. They laughed. 2 truckers walked up to the counter from a black booth, plunked their change down, and started toward the door. "Jenkins, O'Brien," Monahan said to them. "Come on over here, meet Johnny Kovac. He's our new organizer." One of the men glanced back. "Gotta run, Mike. You know how it is." Monahan watched them leave. "Sure, go on," he said. Bitterness iced his voice. "Chasing my business away again, huh, Mike?" Myrtle said when the men had left from the other end of the counter. "Ah," Monahan grumbled. "How much you want to bet those guys still wet the bed at night?" Myrtle kept washing her dishes. Her back was to them. "You know better than that, Mike," she said softly. "They got families. They can't afford no trouble." "Yeah, sure," Monahan said. He ate his pie. He was sullen and silent. "You hear anything, Mertz?" Monahan said after a while. "Same old pot of beans," she said. "Joe Harper's real sick. Kidneys. You heard about that, I guess." Monahan nodded and sipped his coffee. He got up suddenly. "Thanks, Mertz," he said. "Take care of Johnny if he needs it, huh?" Myrtle smiled at Johnny. "He can take care of it himself when he needs it." Monahan bustled out the door. Johnny hurried to catch up with him. "What's the big rush?" Johnny said. "I wasn't finished with my pie." Monahan didn't say anything. "What's the matter?" Johnny said. "Hell, Joe Harper and me." We used to drive 5-ton electric ice trucks together. One of the first guys I ever signed up." Monahan started climbing the passenger side of the big truck. He suddenly changed his mind. "I'll take her," he said gruffly. He got behind the wheel and gunned the big truck out of the parking lot. The motor screamed. The jalopy stopped at the consolidated gate. A guard came out of the booth and looked at Johnny and Abe. "We're from the Federation of Interstate Truckers," Johnny said. "We want to talk to the men." The guard grinned. "Just a minute." He walked into the booth and picked up the telephone. Johnny and Abe watched him closely from the car. The guard hung up and walked back to them slowly, still grinning. "You gotta leave the car here," he said. "Is it still gonna be here when we get back?" Abe grinned. "Sure," the guard smiled. "I'll keep an eye on it for you." "Thanks," Johnny said. "That's real nice of you." As they walked into the lot, they noticed they were being followed by two men. They approached the truck dock and saw the truckers watching them nervously. "I'm Johnny Kovac. I'm with the Federation of Interstate Truckers, and I want to talk to you about—" "Not interested," the trucker said, looking away from him. "Listen, I just want to talk to you a couple minutes." "Didn't you hear me?" the trucker said, his voice loud now. "I said I ain't interested." Johnny turned from him to another man. "I'm Johnny Kovac. This is Abe Belkin. We're with the Federation of—" "Give me a break, will ya?" the trucker said. He was trembling. He kept looking around. "I thought we talked to you about the pay you're getting," Johnny said. "I'm a member," the trucker said, whispering. He kept glancing at the two men who were following Johnny and Abe. "I pay my dues. Just leave me alone, will ya?" Johnny looked back at the two men following them. "Monahan's a friend of mine," the trucker said. "Come on, I don't need no trouble." Johnny hesitated. "Please," the trucker said. Johnny and Abe looked at each other, then turned disgustedly from the truck dock and walked back across the lot to the gate. The two men were still following them. When they got to the gate, the guard opened it for them. He slammed the gate shut behind them, and it was then that they saw that one of the jalopy's tires was flat. Johnny wheeled in fury on the guard. "You bastards!" he cried. "Something wrong with the car?" the guard said. He was grinning. "Come on, Johnny," Abe said. "Let's get the hell out of here." Johnny looked at the jalopy, at the guards smiling at them, at the drivers watching them from the dock. "We gotta fix the tire, Abe," he said. He got down on the ground, and when he was finished, he was dirty from head to toe. His old man's blue suit was ruined. He yelled at the men in the truck dock. "See you guys." A few of them waved at him good-naturedly. Inside the jalopy, he laughed. "I'm glad something's funny," Abe said. "Abe, old buddy," Johnny said, "I got a big idea." A few days later, they pulled the jalopy up behind the truck, which was parked at the side of the road. "I don't know," Abe said. "This better work better than going to the docks." "Well, we ain't gonna get any flat tires," Johnny said. "That's for sure." They got out of the jalopy and Johnny walked to the driver's side of the truck jauntily, Abe a few steps behind him. "Anybody home?" Johnny grinned. He put his hand on the door. A lead pipe smashed down on the door and missed his hand by inches. Both of them jumped back. "Jesus Christ," Johnny said. "Get the hell away from my rig," a voice inside the cab said. They saw him now. He was in his mid-40s, red-faced and sleepy, a cap pulled low over his eyes. "Listen, we're with the union," Johnny said. "Bullshit you are." "We're signing up members," Abe said. "Last time somebody knocked on my door," the man said, "they took my whole load." "We got cards," Abe said. He held up a card. The man snatched the card suspiciously out of the air, the lead pipe still in his hand. He laughed. "Okay, you're from the union," he said. "Now get the hell out of here." Abe said, "Don't you want to do something about what the companies are doing to the drivers?" The man laughed again. "What'd you say your name was?" "Abe. Abe Belkin." "Abe?" he said. "I should have known. Now listen here, Abe. Monahan's been trying to get me signed up for years, and he ain't got no place. You can't do me no good. Your union can't do no good. And that rummy president of yours, Matt Rafferty, I know sure as shit he can't do me no good. So get the fuck out of here and let me get some sleep." "If you sign up for the union," Johnny said, "they can't fuck you that bad." Upside down they can fuck ya and start all over again. If everybody signs up, Johnny said, they can't fuck you at all. Yeah? The man said. I'll sign up when everybody's signed up. How's that? He grinned. But we can give you more clout with the company, Johnny said. The man laughed. You two jokers? The union. The man looked at him knowingly. You sure you and Abe here just don't want to collect dues? The dues aren't much, Abe said, considering how we could help you. The man laughed again. Will you get out of here, he said. You're worse than a traveling salesman. You don't have to pay no dues, Johnny said. Abe looked at him quizzically. What was that again? The man said. I don't give a shit when you pay 'em, Johnny said. How about this? You don't have to pay no dues till we do something for you. The man considered it a moment, then said, Bullshit. I still gotta pay 'em sometime. He smiled. I bet you thought you had me there, smart guy. What the hell do you want, for Christ's sake? Johnny said loudly. I told you what the hell I want, the man shouted back at him. I want you to get out of here. All right, fuck you, Johnny said angrily. You want to end up like Joe Harper? Go on. Let's go, Abe. They turned and started walking away. Wait a minute, the man called after them. They walked back to him. I ain't got to pay no dues, the man said. I told you, Johnny said. I ain't got to sign nothing? Nothing. We got a meeting on Friday at 8 o'clock, St. Stephen's basement. Just show up. What the hell's your name anyway? The man said. Johnny Kovac, he said, grinning. What the hell's yours? Higgins. Tom Higgins. Hell, everybody knows me. He paused. But I ain't signing nothing. See you Friday, Tom. Johnny grinned. Inside the jalopy, Abe said, Who's Joe Harper? Johnny smiled. Joe Harper's the best friend we got. The St. Stephen's basement was a cramped, box-like place with a low ceiling, few windows, and walls badly in need of repainting. Behind a table at the front of the claustrophobic room sat Monahan and Abe, both wearing old suits. On the table were a gavel, a pitcher filled with water, and water glasses. Draped over it was a banner that said, Federation of Interstate Truckers, Local 302. 150 men sat stiffly in front of the table on folding wooden chairs. They smoked and fidgeted and called out to each other. We gonna sit here all night? Higgins blustered impatiently from the front row. Where's Johnny? Monahan whispered to Abe. I don't know. He said he had to talk to somebody. He picked a terrific time, Monahan said. He's 20 minutes late. I ain't been in a church 20 years, Higgins said loudly. This is worse than going to Mass. Some of the men laughed. Monahan shook his head, swore, got up, and banged his gavel. You guys know I'm no speaker, Monahan faltered. Yeah, we know that all right, Higgins yelled. The men laughed. We called you together here tonight, Monahan said, so all of you could hear Johnny Kovac, our new organizer. He ought to be here any minute now. And I ought to go home any minute now, Higgins shouted. The men laughed again. But I guess I might as well say a few words, Monahan said distastefully. Get him out already, Higgins cried. Monahan smiled lamely. I'm trying, Tom. The men laughed again. You guys know the Federation's been around a while, Monahan said. I don't have to tell you that, but I want to tell you that it's never been needed as much as now, because the companies are putting it to us like they never did before, and the only thing we got to hold them off is by getting together, so that when they pick on one of us, they're picking on all of us. That's what a union's about. That's what our national president, Matt Rafferty— Come on, Mike, Higgins blustered. For the love of Christ. That's what Matt's been trying to get across all these years, Monahan said. He's been drunk for most of them, Higgins shouted. The men laughed. I wouldn't say that, Tom, Monahan said over their laughter. Every man likes a few now and then. The men laughed harder. At the back of the hall, the door opened loudly. The men turned. Wearing his battered leather jacket, Johnny was supporting a weak and shriveled man who walked with great pain. The men quieted down as Johnny walked the sick man to the front table. The men smiled at the emaciated man but kept staring at his condition. Well, now that Johnny's here, Monahan said with great relief, he'll just go on for me. Johnny took his jacket off, rolled up the sleeves of his faded work shirt, and looked at the men. The room was quiet. "I'm not going to give you guys any goddamn sermons," Johnny said. "I'm not going to bullshit you. You guys know your problems a hell of a lot better than me. You want to sign up for the union? Okay. I'm not going to twist your arm." He paused nervously. He didn't know how to continue. The men watched him closely, assessingly. "You guys know Joe Harper," Johnny said. He looked at Harper. Harper kept his eyes to the floor. "Well, Joe Harper was one of the first guys in this union. He's been coming to meetings more than 20 years. Mike and Joe used to drive together." Monahan put his arm around Harper at the speaker's table. The men watched them. "Joe's sick," Johnny said, "'cause all his life he busted his ass running from one place to another to feed his family. The only shit the company ever gave about Joe was to bust his ass more and more, till Joe busted up his kidneys. Then the company stopped giving any shit at all. Joe's through. As far as the company goes, Joe's a dead man." Johnny paused. No one in the room said anything. No one moved. "But I want to tell you guys," Johnny said, louder now, his eyes flashing. "As far as this union's concerned, Joe's no dead man. We're paying Joe's doctor bills. We're taking care of his family. 'Cause Joe Harper's been a union man all these years, and God damn it, we're going to take care of him and the people he loves." Harper nodded. His eyes were glazed. Monahan kept his arm around him. "And I want to tell you something else," Johnny said. "If you guys sign up and join this union, and if other guys like you sign up for the union, then we can make the companies give a shit about your kidneys. We can get you money for the doctors and overtime, and you won't have to kill yourselves making a buck." He paused. Then, in a softer voice, he said, "Like my old man did. You sign up, and you make this union tough, and we'll make you tough." His voice was hard and steel-edged. "I promise you that. No goddamn company bastard living up in the heights is gonna fuck over your life. I promise you that." He stopped abruptly, looked at the men defiantly, then turned suddenly away. "Come on, Joe," he said. "Let's go home." He put his jacket on, helped Harper up, and walked him across the hall to the door. The men watched them quietly as they left. Then Higgins got up sheepishly and walked up to Mike Monahan. "Count me in, Mike," Higgins said. His voice was a whisper. The other men started lining up behind him. 2 weeks later, more than 300 men had signed up to be members of Local 302. Johnny and Abe were out on the road 16 hours a day. Johnny sat in his office one night, exhausted, his shoeless feet on his desk, when the door opened. The man was expertly tailored, tall and silver-haired, in his early 50s. He smiled. It was a thin smile. "Mr. Kovac?" Johnny nodded and kept his feet on the desk and didn't move. "I'm Arthur St. Clair, Mr. Kovac," the man said. "I'm the general counsel for Talbot's Consolidated." "I know who you are," Johnny said. His voice was flat. St. Clair smiled. "May I sit down?" Johnny shrugged. "You climb the stairs, pal." "So I did," St. Clair said. He sat down across the desk and looked at Johnny. He was sizing him up. "It occurs to me, Mr. Kovac," he said, smiling, "that we have some concerns in common." Johnny grinned. "Yeah?" "In different ways," St. Clair said. "We are both concerned about our truckers. You for the union," he paused, "and your commission, of course." Course, Johnny smiled. "And I'm concerned for the company and our profits, of course." "Your profits," Johnny smiled. "Sure, that makes sense." St. Clair returned his smile. "Now it's been brought to my attention, Mr. Kovac, that you have a special talent for, communication with drivers. I'd like to put that talent to work." "How do you plan on doing that?" Johnny said. "By hiring you to work for us," St. Clair said. Johnny laughed. "Think seriously about it, Mr. Kovac," St. Clair said. "Think of the good you can do inside the company helping our drivers." "You think I could really help them?" Johnny smiled. "I'm sure you could," St. Clair said. "A man with your talents." "What about the union, though?" Johnny said. "What's going to happen to that?" St. Clair smiled. "Well, your associate, what's his name? Mr. Belkin? He could carry on for you, couldn't he?" "Sure, Abe," Johnny grinned. "Why didn't I think of that?" "Salary, of course, is no problem," St. Clair said. "We'd be happy to double whatever you're making." "Not bad," Johnny said. "Not bad," St. Clair said. "It's very fair, I think." Johnny got up, walked to the window of his little office, and looked down at the fleet of consolidated trucks. "You know something, St. Clair?" he said. "The first day I moved in here, I knew then that if I did my job, the day'd come where you'd climb the stairs." St. Clair smiled wryly. "I knew then what I'd say to you when you got up here." St. Clair looked at him curiously. Johnny smiled, leaned very close to his face, and almost whispered, "Get the fuck out of my office." St. Clair blinked with the words, stared at him silently a moment, then smiled. "As you get older, Kovac," St. Clair said, "you'll find civility can be learned, sometimes even taught." He got up and went to the door. "When you change your mind," St. Clair said, "give me a call." Johnny watched her from a distance. Sheriff's deputies were piling an old woman's furniture onto the tenement sidewalk. The old woman, who wore a black dress and a black babushka, was sobbing. Anna was trying to comfort her in a language he couldn't understand. When one of the deputies passed her, Anna stopped him. "You're real proud of yourself, ain't you?" she said. "It's my job, lady," the deputy said. "Putting her into the street?" Anna said. "She's 86 years old. She can't even speak English." "It's a court order, lady," the deputy said. "She didn't pay the rent. Here, the judge signed it. See? It's the law. The landlord's law," Anna said. Johnny walked up to her. "Hey, Anna." "What do you want?" she said. Her eyes were brimming with tears. "You're crying." "I am not," she said. "You are so." "Well, don't you ever cry?" Johnny smiled. "Nah, I just get into fights." She looked at him. "It's better than crying," he said. She wiped the tears from her eyes. "Hey, Anna," he said gently. "Let me buy you a—" "I don't drink beer, I told you." "Nah, coffee. A cup of coffee." She was hesitant. "At the penny pantry. Round the corner where all the rich people eat." The deputies were driving away. The old woman was being led down the street by someone. Her furniture was piled high on the sidewalk. Anna watched the old woman walk away slowly. "Those bastards," she said. She looked like she was going to cry again. Johnny didn't know what to say. "Let me ask you a personal question," he said formally. She looked at him, surprised at his tone. "Do you always swear?" he said. For the first time, she smiled at him. "Come on," Johnny said. "One cup of coffee." She nodded slowly. He grinned and took her arm. She quickly and forcefully yanked the arm away and stepped away from him. He laughed. "Okay, okay." He stuck his hands into his pockets dramatically. "No hands. See?" At the penny pantry, they sat across from each other over a little table, drinking coffee. She volunteered nothing, eyed him suspiciously, but answered his questions. She was 19 years old. She lived in another part of the flats, in a Lithuanian neighborhood, with her mother, who was a seamstress. Her father died when she was 4 years old, on the ship that brought them over from the old country. She asked him nothing about himself except where he worked. Johnny told her about Monahan and the union. He kept ordering cups of coffee. He didn't want this conversation to end. He wanted to keep looking into those big green eyes. "That's what we're trying to do with with the union," he said. "To make sure that guys can't be, can't be screwed over by those bastards anymore." "It must feel good doing your work," Anna said. "Yeah, of course, I'm just learning about it yet." He paused. He looked at the clock on the wall. "Listen," he said, his words hurried. "How about if we go to a show sometime?" She smiled. "At the dime store," she said. "We had 2 girls that tried a union there. They threw 'em out." "They got Ginger Rogers in that show on Detroit Avenue," he said. "The girls couldn't get jobs anymore after that," she said. He looked at her. "But see," he said, "you get everybody together, hundreds of guys, thousands of guys. They can't do that no more." She glanced at the clock again. "You look a little like Ginger Rogers," he said simply. "You know that?" "I do not," she said. "Nobody ever told me that before." He grinned. "How about Saturday night? I'll pick you up." "I've got plans," she said loftily. "Sunday night. I've got plans." He laughed. "You sure got a lot of plans." "You always push people?" she said. He grinned. "When I really want something." "It's not polite." "Next Saturday," he said. She shook her head. "Okay," he grinned. "The Saturday after that." She smiled. "Come on, Anna." She lowered her eyes to the table, then lifted them. She was thinking about it. She looked at him seriously. "No hands?" she said. "A statue," he said. "I'll bet." He leaned closer to her over the table, laughing. "You know you got pretty eyes, Anna." She moved back from him. "I'll bring 'em," she said. Johnny was walking out of Myrtle's one night when a trucker he had never seen before said, "Hey Kovac, the guy in the rig over there." Johnny walked over to the truck, which was parked at the far edge of the lot. "Hey, you want to sign up?" he said. "You Kovac?" a man in the cab said. "That's me," Johnny smiled. Then a voice behind him said, "Yeah, we all want to sign up." There were 3 of them. All of them had tire irons in their hands. "Well, come on," one of them said to him. "Aren't you going to sign us up?" He laughed in a high, thin falsetto, which was almost a giggle. He was a hawk-faced, pale man with blonde hair and a jagged scar running down the right side of his face. They moved toward him. Johnny stepped back from them to the cab door, but the door was suddenly slammed into his back. Knocked forward, he went down on the gravel. The man with the scar kicked him in the chest. He reeled back and was kicked again. One of them stood over him with a tire iron and swung it at the back of his head. It was a glancing blow which knocked him semi-conscious. They lifted him up into the back of the truck and threw him over the seat. They took turns hitting him with their fists. "We want you to remember this, Kovac," the one with the scar said. 3 of them held him down, and the one with the scar lifted his knee into his groin. And then he did it again and again. He could hear the man's thin laughter until the moment he passed out. When he got out of bed 3 days later, his right eye was black and the lower part of his body was riddled with pain. "Telephone, Johnny," his mother said. He walked painfully to his new telephone, which Mike Monahan was paying for. "Arthur St. Clair, Kovac," the voice said. "I thought perhaps you had changed your mind." He hurled the phone furiously against the kitchen wall. His mother stood there in shock. Johnny walked to the wall, bent down, the pain almost unbearable now, picked the pieces of the telephone up, and put them on the kitchen table. His mother watched him open-mouthed. He looked at her and slowly smiled. "We need a new phone, Ma," he said. Matt Rafferty sat behind the speaker's table in the crowded church hall, a snowy-haired, florid-faced man in his 60s wearing an expensive 3-piece suit with a gold chain dangling across its vest. He listened amusedly as this new kid organizer with the black eye spoke to his men. "It's no goddamn mystery who did it," Johnny said. "I'll tell you guys. If they pound the shit out of me and they get away with it, then they can pound the shit out of you, Higgins, or Mike, or anybody in here." "Not me, Johnny," Higgins said. "I got my iron." The men laughed nervously, then became somber. "So maybe we ought to think real hard about that," Johnny said. "Strike the bastards," one of the men yelled. There was a sudden, overwhelming silence. "Strike my ass," Higgins mumbled. Matt Rafferty smiled. No one said anything. "I guess I got nothing else to say," Johnny said. He sat down next to Abe behind the speaker's table and Monahan got up. "Well," Monahan said, "we got here today from Flint, Michigan, a man all you know or heard about. A man who's a real living legend in the union movement." Higgins couldn't restrain himself. "It's Henry Ford," he shouted. The men laughed. Matt Rafferty laughed with them. "Oh, the hell with this," Monahan said. "Matt Rafferty, the national president of the Federation." Matt Rafferty stood up and waved broadly as the men cheered him. "Let her rip, Matt," Higgins yelled. The men kept cheering. All right," Matt Rafferty laughed over the noise. "You're going to turn your hands into sausage already." The men laughed and Matt Rafferty reached for the gavel and pounded it several times. "Thank you, Mike," Rafferty said. "I'm happy to be back here in Cleveland. It's always a pleasure to see old and good friends, even if they are the biggest noisemakers God ever created." The men laughed again. "What I want to talk to you men about here today is something I've been seeing every place I go." "Skirts!" Higgins yelled. Rafferty looked at him and paused. "If any of you real smart guys want to crack wise," Matt Rafferty said, "get the hell out of here and do it outside. This is a union meeting. I don't want to think the company sent some of you in here to disrupt it." The men quieted down. Rafferty savored the silence, then continued. "That's better," he said. "What I want to talk to you about today is this business of red Bolsheviki agitation. I've seen them in Pittsburgh, in Detroit. You've got them right here in Cleveland, trying to stir up good union men against the system of government all of us love." "Let her rip, Matt," Higgins yelled again. Rafferty glanced at Higgins, at some of the men who were laughing at Higgins' defiance, then ignored him and continued. "Now I know we've got problems with some of the companies now and then, but that's why we're here. That's why the Federation's here. To iron those things out with your bosses. To get more into your pay. And sure, to make sure the companies can still cut a profit. Because, we all know, the company stops making a profit, we stop making a profit." Johnny nudged Abe. "I thought he was on our side." "I'll tell you men something," Rafferty continued. "The one thing we always want to avoid is the strike. Everybody loses in a strike. The company loses. You lose. And you don't want to let any rabble-rouser on the come for his own self stir you into that. Now these Reds, they don't care about the company, and that means they don't care about you men either. They just want to go into the street and hold marches, give big speeches, stir you up into losing your jobs." Abe leaned closer to Johnny. "I know I ain't on his side." "Now the other thing I have to talk to you men about," Matt Rafferty said, "is paying your dues on time." The men moaned. "Here we go," Johnny said. All right, Rafferty said. "I know you don't like to hear it, but without your dues, this union can't exist." "And with them we can't exist," Higgins shouted. The men laughed. "So it's very important that you don't procrastinate," Rafferty said. "That when you get your pay, you come right down here." "To the fucking church?" Higgins shouted. The men laughed again. "You know what I mean," Rafferty said. "To the Federation office, pay your dues and get it out of the way, and—" The men catcalled and laughed. Johnny laughed with them. Rafferty noticed it and glanced at him sharply. Ziggy's tavern was full and noisy. Rafferty sat at a table drinking straight bourbon, the shot glasses lined up around him. Johnny, Abe, and Mike Monahan sat with him. "We, by God, have come a long way since then, Mike, haven't we?" Rafferty said, downing a shot. "The holes in the road back then, the dust, the ice. Yes, sir, those were the good old days. Yes, sir, they were." "I'll be right back," Johnny said. He walked across the crowded tavern and saw Mishka and some of his friends drinking at a table. "Get over here, you," Mishka roared. "Don't you come see your friends?" Johnny was watching the sexy red-headed waitress. "I'm gonna buy Misha a drink," he told her. "Big shot," Mishka laughed. "Won't even drink with us," he shouted after him. "I seen you when you got diapers on, Johnny." Rafferty kept watching Johnny from his table. "Every bohunk in here know him?" Rafferty said. "Johnny?" Abe laughed. "Everybody likes Johnny." Rafferty looked at Abe, glowered, and didn't say anything. On the other side of the tavern, Johnny caught up with the waitress. "Hey, Molly," he said. "How'd you know my name?" she said. "Never mind," he grinned. "He wants to go out with you." "Who?" Johnny grinned. "The gentleman you like. His name's Abe." She walked haughtily away. Johnny laughed, went back to his table, and sat down. "Christ," Rafferty was saying to Monahan. "One time, out of the where the hell was it, Mike? Fort Wayne?" "Her name's Molly," Johnny whispered to Abe. "She wants to go out with you." She don't even know my name," Abe said shyly. "She does so. She told me." Abe looked at her across the tavern. "If you don't," Johnny laughed, "then I will." Abe laughed. "Couldn't fix the damn truck," Rafferty was saying to Monahan. "Near froze to death." He glanced at Johnny and Abe and saw them whispering to each other. "You're not a driver, are you, Kovac?" Rafferty said. Johnny turned to him. "Huh?" "I said, you're not a driver, are you?" "Yeah," Johnny said. "I drove some with Mike." Monahan laughed. "You should have seen Johnny out there, Mike, hammering down on her like—" "I bet you did," Rafferty said harshly, his eye on Johnny. "Joy driving around. Never worked at it, did you?" "Not at driving," Johnny said evenly. "Not at that." "Didn't think so," Rafferty said. "Talk a pretty hot-headed game, though, don't you?" He laughed at him. "You never even drove. You don't know what you're talking about, do you?" Johnny glared at him. "Matt," Monahan said pleadingly. "Get off of this. Since Johnny come in, we've grown, Matt. We've tripled the men. You get a black guy," Rafferty said to Johnny. "You start talking strike right away. You want these poor sons of bitches to lose their jobs?" "What the fuck do you want to do?" Johnny said angrily. "You want to go in and crawl, beg 'em to listen to you?" "You don't fool me," Rafferty said. "I've seen a dozen ambitious guys like you, stirring the men up, grandstanding, getting them signed up, putting money in your mattress." "God damn it," Johnny said. His face was flushed. "Pretty soon the company comes along," Rafferty said, "and offers you something. You take. All you punks take. More money in your goddamn mattress." Johnny leaped up and grabbed Rafferty by his lapels. He pulled him over the table. The bar hushed. Johnny held on to Rafferty and pushed his face into his. "I don't take nothing," he said. He released the red-faced old man suddenly, turned, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of the tavern without saying anything. Rafferty reached for a shot glass. Abe got up from the table. "I gotta go, Mike. We'll have another beer." Abe walked away from the table and on his way to the door bumped into the waitress. "Geez, I'm sorry," he said. He paused. "Molly?" She smiled. "It didn't hurt, Abe." He laughed, looked at her, and hesitated. "I was thinking," he said haltingly. "Maybe sometime. I'm off Saturday." She smiled. And that's a good time to end Chapter 9. Thank you all for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. I really appreciate it. Have a good one.